Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the legislative meeting. And who all do we have? We have Dr. Burr. Do we have the others on remote? Yes, we'll see Vanessa. Good morning, Vanessa, and Supervisor Rutherford. Good morning.
Dr. Burke's camera is turned.
Dr. Burr, you could just turn your camera. I think I'm getting
It'll be fixed in about 2 minutes.
Okay, all right.
Don't worry about that. I can see you fine.
Good, all right, you can see us, all right. And Councilmember Buscaino is not going to be here with us this morning, I assume?
Right.
Okay, and Supervisor Perez is not going to be with us, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we will go ahead with our usual course of business, which are the reports from our consultants. And we do have another item on our agenda this morning, which we expect will take a bit of time. So we're going to ask our consultants to just give us brief updates on what is happening. And so we first have Mark Kadish on the line. And Mark, do you want to give us a brief update of?
Yes, I will be very brief with two quick updates to our monthly report. Good morning. The first is, as the South Coast staff knows, we've been working with Congresswoman Eshoo, who's the senior member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the senior Californian on the Energy and Commerce Committee, to introduce a bill which we've supported, the Smoke Planning and Research Act, which is going to provide, if it is enacted into law, it would provide an authorization for federal fundings to help communities research, develop, and implement plans to help mitigate smoke. And among the things, the way it would do that would provide an EPA grant program of up to $50 million to help communities plan and respond to wildfire smoke. And as part of that, the eligible entities, they specifically named air quality management districts as eligible recipients to do the work on monitoring and other things that are so critical during these periods. The second quick thing I wanted to update you on was, as I think everyone knows, the federal government is operating under a continuing resolution, meaning we haven't fully funded the government, and that expires on November 21st in about 2 weeks. There's really no expectation that the federal government will finish its appropriations bills by that time, and so what we're expecting is another continuing resolution that will probably go to sometime before Christmas. It turns out if you threaten people's Christmas, they might compromise and reach a deal, but we're still hopeful on that. And as part of that, we are, of course, watching closely the DERA, the Targeted Airshed programs, the 103, 105, and other programs that are critical to South Coast. So that's my update, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Mark. Any questions for Mark? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Carmen Group. And this morning we're going to hear from Dal Harper. Good morning, Dal.
Good morning, Madam Chair. No updates to our written report, but happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Dal? Okay, thank you very much. And next we have Cassidy and Associates. Amelia, I believe you're on the line this morning. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, everyone. This is Amelia with Cassidy and Associates, along with our newest South Coast team member, Angela. And we will just, for the sake of brevity, say that we do not have any other updates to our written report. So thank you.
Okay, any questions about the report? Seeing none, we will move on to our state consultants. And first we're going to have Paul from Gonzalez and Sons. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. No update to our written report, but again, happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions? Seeing none. Next we have Quintana Watson Hartman and David Quintana. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am. I have nothing to add to my written report. Thank you.
Okay, and any questions about the written report? Seeing none. California Advisors, we have Ross Buckley on the line. Good morning, Ross. Any update?
Good morning, ma'am. Just one quick update. Last Friday, on November 1st, Senator Jeff Stone of Riverside County resigned from the Senate to take a federal appointment, and that's my only update.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions? All right, okay, good. Then we'll move on to the recommended 2020 legislative goals and objectives. We do this annually, and so staff is here to give us a brief update on that. I don't believe it's differed that much from what we've done in years past, but I will ask Philip and Lisa. Is Lisa going to give the report?
Okay, on federal.
Oh, okay, to give the report on this one.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Included in the committee packet is a listing of proposed state legislative goals and objectives for 2020 for the South Coast District. The state legislative goals focus on the following: seeking new and increasing existing funding sources for clean air programs and priorities that protect public health and ensure attainment of state and federal air quality standards, with a focus on incentive programs that support the 2016 AQMD. And very much in line with that goal is South Coast AQMD's legislative priority in 2020, SB 732 by Senator Allen, which is moving forward in January. Additionally, there's also goals focusing on protecting South Coast AQMD authority to implement clean air policies and programs, and also working to ensure that the state government does its fair share to reduce air pollution by providing legislative funding and regulatory support to the South Coast AQMD to facilitate implementation of the 2016 AQMD and attainment of federal standards, supporting legislation and funding to promote environmental justice initiatives that reduce localized health risks from criteria pollutant and toxic air emissions, and expand access to clean air technology in disadvantaged communities. This includes securing the necessary resources to implement the South Coast AQMD's responsibilities created by AB 617. Also supporting policies and funding that promote the development and deployment of zero and near zero emission infrastructure, equipment, and vehicles, and supporting efforts directing that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund provides a sustainable funding source to maximize criteria pollutant and toxic emission reduction co-benefits. Also supporting energy efficiency, demand reduction, and reliable, cost-effective, and clean energy for the South Coast region. And lastly, supporting legislation, policies, and administrative actions that encourage job retention and creation and promote economic growth while working toward attainment of clean air standards. So staff recommends approval of the proposed 2020 state legislative goals and objectives. And I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Okay, so you're going to give us the federal update. Okay, Lisa, go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm going to keep the federal presentation very brief. It's largely the same as our goals and objectives for 2019. We have tightened it a little bit as we're focusing on issues related to the attainment of the federal clean air standards, federal fair share of reducing their sources of air pollution, Clean Trucks Initiative, and CAFE and California Waiver. In particular, we're also focused on any climate change initiatives and the potential transportation and infrastructure bill. And with that, I will conclude and recommend approval.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for either Philip or Lisa from committee members? Okay, seeing none. Is there any public comment on this? I guess I only have a blue card on number 4, so I'm assuming no one else wants to speak on this. We have a full house here. Great. Okay. So we will, I'll ask for a motion to approve the objectives for next year.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion from Dr. Burke, and a second, please.
Second.
From
I second that.
Sandra Delgado, seconds. And a roll call vote, please.
Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Senator Delgado?
Aye.
Supervisor Rutherford?
Aye.
Mayor Mitchell?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to item 4, which is the updates on legislation regarding the voting district authorization. We had some requests from our committee members and our board members to talk about if we even get this, through the legislative process, if we are able to establish a voter authorization district, then what will we spend the money on? And so our staff has done some good work on that and has come up with a report for us. So I think Derek's going to present that.
So I'll give an update on our activities in Sacramento, and then after that, the next item, you'll get a spending plan, preliminary spending plan scenario by Phil Fine's group, or Sarah's going to give the presentation. But over the last month, since our last legislative committee meeting, we've made 3 trips to Sacramento and met with a number of stakeholders, including both union and other types of associations. But one of the really important meetings that we had just happened when Wayne and I were up last week, and some feedback that we got early on was we need to diversify or add on additional sponsors of our voter district authorization bill. So we first checked with Senator Allen's staff to make sure they're okay with it, and they actually agreed with it. They feel they need more diversification on the bill. So we reached out to Assembly Member Carrillo's office, Senator DeRosa's office. We spoke with Assembly Member Eduardo Garcia about co-sponsoring. We're going to get more co-sponsors. We're going to reach out next week. We're meeting with staff members from Connie Leiva's office, Senator Connie Leiva's office, and Assembly Member Reyes's office to see if they are willing to also co-sponsor. And we're going to get as many co-sponsors on this piece of legislation as possible. We're going to continue to work up in Sacramento on the stakeholders to get support for it. Hopefully when the bill gets active in January, we'll have a long list of supporters for this bill when it gets to committee. That's the end of my report. I'm available to answer any questions.
Any questions for Derek on this matter?
I don't have any questions here, but just know that I'm very willing to help any way I can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. That's very useful to us. And now I see Sarah coming forward, but is Sarah going to Ian or Ian?
Sarah's going to be Ian.
Oh, Sarah is going to be Ian. Okay, Ian's sitting here too.
We're interchangeable.
Oh,
Yeah, we're so much alike.
Denise?
Okay.
Well, she don't want to.
The presentation up?
Thanks.
Okay, well, we're getting the presentation up, Madam Chair, members of the committee, so I'm going to give an update, a preliminary discussion on our spending scenario that we developed for the regional funding measure. I'm going to emphasize the word preliminary. You'll hear me say that a lot. This is just an initial rough cut at what a potential spending scenario could look like. And as I'll get through the presentation, there's a lot more work that we'll need to do if we're successful with this funding measure. So just a quick background of where we are. We've discussed this voter district authorization bill with stakeholders as we were making the rounds and having those discussions. We were asked to provide more detail. We've been pointing to our 2016 Air Quality Management Plan that had identified the need for additional funding to be able to attain the standards, but it was a funding need, but it didn't have any specifics. And so in response to that request, we developed this preliminary spending scenario. It points to the funding needs we identified in the 2016 AQMD, and then as well as potential revenue that would be generated from a new 1/2 cent sales tax. We do need to do some additional analysis. We are currently undergoing some additional detailed analysis. For example, we know we need more analysis to support our 2023 contingency measure, as well as the 2022 AQMP, which work is just starting on that right now. So we will be updating, including updated funding needs, as well as additional analysis we'll be bringing back to committee when we develop that. And then if we are successful, we need to develop a more formal spending plan with additional details. Just to walk back, so why we're doing this, We know we need very significant and substantial NOx reductions beyond baseline in order to meet upcoming ozone standards. We need to have a 45% reduction by 2023, in 2031 a 55% reduction, and we have 2037 on the horizon as well. That's for attainment of the 2015 ozone standard. That's likely going to be in the range of a 62% reduction of NOx. We're starting the work on the 2022 AQMD, and so that will more fully identify that. Most of the NOx reductions we identified in the 2023 and 2031 deadlines are these further deployment measures. So it's a provision under the Clean Air Act for extreme non-attainment ozone areas, which we are one, that allows you to point to future technology developments and advances in technology that will come and deliver these emission reductions. For us, that really looks at relying on incentive programs, perhaps new regulations in the future and other future measures that will get those reductions. So in that 2016 AQMD, we identified a need of $14.6 billion between 2017 and 2031 to be able to implement these further deployment measures. Almost all of these are from mobile sources. Our cost analysis was based on turning over that fleet, what it takes to replace those engines, those vehicles, and different incentive levels associated with that. Some background on our voting district authorization bill. In March 2017, the board approved our 2016 AQMD, including the socioeconomic report that identified the funding needs to attain the standards. From August of 2017 through April of 2018, we held several AQMD funding working group meetings to discuss potential options moving forward. In April of 2018, we presented to the board some survey results for a potential sales tax concept, which indicated some support for this idea. In September of 2018, the board approved staff's pursuit of voted district authorization legislative concept and funding for up to a 1% sales tax. And then in March of 2019, we presented to this committee additional survey results regarding the sales tax concept. And I want to point out this is a three-step process. First, we have to be successful in getting the voting district authorization bill approved. Then, if we are successful with that, have to get a sales tax proposal on the ballot. And then that ballot proposal has to be successful in order for us to eventually get the funding. In terms of our modeling approach, again, this is really aimed at getting those funds and deploying those in a way that turns over the mobile source fleet. So getting replacement engines, replacement equipment, and vehicles in the fleet. And so we estimated, the incentive levels based on the types of equipment and vehicles that are out there. It changes over time because initially there's going to be some vehicles that technology is available today that we're able to turn over very quickly. In the future, there's things that we hope will develop, and so the scenarios do change over time. We look at potential control levels associated with turning over the fleets, additional tax revenue that we're going to be generating per year, as well as the county level vehicle populations and emissions in the county level. Key outputs that we're getting from this model, so we know what our emission reductions are going to be according to vehicle type and equipment. Also the spending for different types of vehicles. Spending we've allocated in 5-year increments, so it changes over time, but we're really binning it in those 5-year chunks. And then we've disaggregated it so you can look at the spending by county. So in terms of our assumptions on our spending versus over time, we're assuming this program begins in 2023. So we get funding in 2023. We are assuming no sunsets in this model. We incorporate expected population and economic growth scenarios through this model. And then the funding that we've identified is what we think it'll take to meet the deadlines in 2023, 2031, and 2037. I will point out that it's possible that there are going to be future standards. EPA has a statutory obligation to review national ambient air quality standards every 5 years, and so there could be additional standards developed, and then we would have additional funding needs for that. We do know that we need a coalition of support for this measure. We have had some stakeholders suggest that there's other needs that could be met through this measure, such as in general clean transportation. But for us, getting those air quality standards, meeting those standards is really the top priority. And so kind of breaking this down, what this scenario looks like by county, we thought that would be a useful piece to evaluate. You can see that roughly spending, percentage of population for the district matches up roughly with the percent of sales tax revenue generated, where the emissions are, and the percent of spending that we have. I will point out that Orange County is a little bit off. It doesn't match up as well as the others, but more or less this matches up fairly well. And so we do expect that the county level analysis was based on where vehicles are registered, where we expect that equipment to be, if those, and then we aggregate or tie that back to emissions if registration data were not available. So that's how we were able to generate those numbers. Again, we do expect the spending to fluctuate over time depending on when there's where vehicles located, when new equipment is developed, etc. And so here's what this looks like. The spending approach looks like from 2023 to 2030. Again, this is very, very preliminary and just one scenario that we could look at. Not surprisingly, most of the spending in that time period would go for near zero emission and zero emission trucks. That's because that's the technology that we have today. Trucks are where most of our NOx emissions are coming from today, so that's where we would have a primary focus. But you can see then we also have many other categories of vehicles that we're investing in. And again, we expect that the level of investment in the different categories of vehicles is going to change over time. So initially, investing heavily in trucks is what we're going to be doing, but as the timeline goes on and is extended, investment in other types of heavy-duty equipment, such as ships and aircraft, becomes dominant. And so what are we getting for all of this? It's really focusing on transformation of the goods movement sector. That's where the overwhelming bulk of our NOx emissions are coming from, and so that's really where we need to focus our efforts. And so from this preliminary spending scenario, we would get 75% of all trucks to zero emissions by 2040, 90% of port equipment would be zero emissions by 2030, all school and transit buses getting down to zero emissions, and then of course we're going to be getting some very significant greenhouse gas emission reduction co-benefits as a result of doing this. This will get us to attain federal air quality standards in 2031 and 2037. As a result of doing that, we avoid 3,000 premature deaths per year and accrue $31 billion in public health benefits. So in terms of next steps, we have some cleanup amendments to SB 732, including adding some oversight committee language, so that needs to happen. We will be continuing to conduct outreach both here and in Sacramento and educate folks about the bill and garner some support about the benefits that we can achieve. Hopefully secure passage of SB 732 by the end of January of 2020. Continue to work with legislatures to shepherd this bill or a new bill if it is needed during the 2020 legislative session, and then hopefully get the governor's signature to move on. On the scenario analysis, the spending scenario analysis, if the bill passes, we will need to conduct a public process, a lot of additional work to develop a more formalized plan, and these scenarios would be developed to support what we identified in the 2016 AQMP as well as the upcoming 2022 AQMP. And we may well need some additional scenarios to work through all of this. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Sarah on the spending? Yes, the executive officer would like to see.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to note that the oversight provision that was not included within the SB 732 language, we actually submitted that language to the Office of Administrative Law along with another changes. OAL didn't incorporate that, so what we would do is before the session starts is send that back again to OAL for inclusion. There's a chance that if that doesn't happen, we may have to take other measures, such as maybe even reintroduce a bill.
Yes, we can amend it on the Assembly side.
Yeah, or we can amend it on the Assembly side. But Supervisor Wester, I wanted to assure you that that language was included, we submitted it, and we're continuing to work on that particular aspect as well.
Yeah, did that...
Great, thank you for that follow-up.
Sure.
Did that not get incorporated because about the same time we were, the author decided to withdraw the bill? What happened? It was kind of a timing thing.
It was a timing issue. There were a number of other provisions that weren't included within what we got back, and I think because it was pulled, it was just left. So that's why we still have to go back to these issues.
Thank you. Any questions now?
Madam Chairman?
Yes,
Madam
Dr.
Chairwoman?
Burke, please go ahead.
And I'm sorry, it was the Legislative Council.
Legislative Council.
Yeah, it's
Took our
OAL,
amendments.
right.
Okay, sorry.
My mistake.
Go ahead, Dr. Burke.
There are some things that aren't clear to me in the presentation this morning, and I'm sure it's just because I don't understand it. The ships and aircraft portion that you said would become a major effort in the latter part of the program. How do we do that since we don't have control over that?
This would be in the form of incentives, and so providing incentives to shipping lines, incentives to airline carriers, for example, to be able to get cleaner technologies or cleaner engines in those vehicles. This is something that's way out in the future. We don't have that right now. That's not something that we would do today. But as we spend more of this money, as we turn over the fleet, as we at some point we get to the point where we've cleaned up all of the trucks. All of the trucks are zero emission. So then you get to a point where you have to look to other categories of equipment and vehicles and start.
I understand that part. I got it. So say everything was done, this passed, it passed the public, and a check came to our door for $1 billion this morning. Who in the agency would administer that money?
Well, we would administer that money most likely through our existing grant programs. So the group that administers the Carl Moyer, the Prop 1B, all the HVIP and the EFMP programs, that would be the largest group. But it wouldn't be enough, Dr. Burke, and we've talked about.
Put some names with that.
So that would be Matt's shop, and then all the people underneath Matt. So Vicky.
You know how I feel about that.
Well, but Dr. Burke, the point that I was about to make was that that's not enough. And we've talked about bringing in and working with additional cities and other organizations so that we could actually push more money out and have greater oversight on it. So it'd be a combination of us managing the money as well as looking to other cities, other organizations that we could push the money out to, so long as we have the oversight mechanisms in place.
This is an overwhelming issue to me because I refuse to be part of a project which takes $1 billion a year from the public and does not have what I feel is a manner by which to disperse this money, which would be efficient and responsible. So my support for this is I don't know how to phrase this, but I am until I get comfort in that area. I have mixed feelings at best about continuing to pursue this.
Appreciate your thoughts and concerns. We can work on some review mechanisms that might give you the confidence. I think we'll hear in the administrative committee on the financial audits, and I think that you should be reassured from their perspective in terms of how the monies are spent and whatnot. But I think we can come up and try to identify if there are other opportunities that would give you that greater comfort, Dr. Burke.
I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, any other comments? Yes.
Madam Chair, just a question. This is one of the most common questions I get is how will the money be spent? As part of our process to move the bill forward, are we doing like small stakeholder groups to get opinions about this draft? Or how are we going to build buy-in on the local level?
Thank you. Derek?
So now that we presented this to committee, we're going to go ahead and not only send it out to the stakeholders that we've already met with, but also in the future meetings, share this with them. This is something that, wasn't given to committee yet, and we had to provide it to the committee first and the board, and then we could share with other stakeholders. But we are going to be sharing this and getting their input because, as I think Sarah said, there's other stakeholders that have some other ideas that they may have for future spending, and we'll hear them out.
And also, I'd like to ask Dr. Fine to sort of comment on the AQMP process, where we do constant outreach and working with groups on the development of these particular aspects. Dr. Fine.
Yeah, so what you have before you is, as Sarah said, is preliminary, but what we know we have to do for the 2022 AQMP is essentially redo this entire analysis. So that will be vetted completely through our AQMP advisory group and any other stakeholders who are interested. Because what we need to do is, this analysis is based on what was done back in 2016 for the AQMP. Technology has changed, the cost of technology has changed. We've lost a couple years of not raising the full $1 billion a year. So this will be reworked over the next, couple months and then be presented through our advisory group.
Could you elaborate on the advisory group, number of people, the variety of the participants?
Yeah, I think we have, it was just appointed, our AQMP advisory group. We have almost 60 stakeholders from all sectors, environmental groups, business groups, city and county officials, typical of what we've had in previous years.
Thank you. And labor as well.
And labor as well.
So other questions?
Just one other comment. So aside from stakeholders, I think there's quite a bit of business groups that would be supportive of the efforts that we're trying to do. The alternative will be legislation that just requires this without the incentive programs. So I think if they truly understood that, they'd be more willing to support our efforts as well. So is that also contemplated to go out to them?
I think we're open to going to everybody. If there's people we don't identify and you want to identify or others want to identify, we're more than happy to go out and reach out to them, explain the situation, and share this plan with them.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? I do have a question. The spending plan is focused on our mobile sources, which are the biggest source of our NOx emissions. But have we considered what stationary sources might come into play? I mean, that may be a way to get support from communities. They're right in the middle of those stationary sources. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts about that.
In the 2016 AQMP, we anticipated that at some point there are going to be stationary source incentives that are as or more cost effective than some of the mobile source incentives. So where we anticipated that, and again, additional analysis still needs to be done, is mostly in the residential and commercial building area where there are technologies to go to zero emission or lower NOx, fuel cell technology, battery backup. And we're doing some work right now on that as well. So that'll come into play in the 2022 AQMP, and to the extent we can find equipment out there that is as or more cost effective than the mobile source incentives, we will absolutely be putting money into that. It'll necessarily be less money than the mobile sources, just because there's less emissions there. But there are some opportunities in residential and commercial equipment.
And just for throw an idea out there, we're working on regulations that are for indirect sources. How do you see any of this funding playing into our efforts to regulate indirect sources?
So we're in the middle of developing our indirect source rules. The one that we're furthest along in is for warehouses. So I'll use that as an example. So we're looking at that indirect source rule as a way to really facilitate some of the things that we're talking about of getting the fleet on the road, getting the cleaner fleet on the road above and beyond what normal other incentives can do or other regulations can do. So you could think of the way what we're crafting this is, giving a lot of credit for infrastructure investments, trying to encourage people to get warehouses to contract with fleets that have cleaner vehicles to provide that additional selling point of those fleets, and a lot of different measures like that. So it's playing into that. It's playing into the, you know, there's regulations, there's incentives, and then ISR you could think of like the third leg of the stool to try to get the facilities where these this equipment visits to also provide that pull for the clean equipment.
Okay. The other thing that Sarah mentioned was that the incentives, you can go to the black box, I guess, is what you were talking about, and rely on future technology developments and future regulation. So CARB has on its books a lot of future regulations. It's going to control trucks, it's going to control public transit, and so I just want to hear from you how you can manage this so that you're getting that incentive money out in front of the regulatory structure.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical. As you know, that what's being proposed, at least in the measures that have been formulated by CARB, it's not enough. It's not nearly enough to get us even to our 2031 goal. So we need these incentives early and often, because right now every truck that's purchased that is not cleaner than the current standard, the 0.2 standard, is going to be on the road for another 10 to 15 years, and it's going to be hard to turn that over until it's end of its useful life. So we need these incentives as soon as possible to make the purchase decisions today are going well beyond the current requirements.
Okay, I think that's all that I have on this issue, but I do think it requires a lot of management. You know, when we're thinking about the overall regulatory structure that's coming down, how we get the money out and how we educate the public on what the need is and how we will manage it. And that's really key. So we do have a request for public comment on this from Denny Zane, Move LA. Good morning, Denny. Welcome.
Good morning. Do I just stand right here?
We're podium there, so you can actually use that. You have documents. So
there we are.
That'd be useful.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay. So, first, let me introduce myself. I'm Denny Zane, Executive Director of Move LA. I grew up in Colton, California, which became one of the most air pollution burdened communities, really, I think, in California at that time. And I remember very well having to leave the basketball court and the tennis court because my lungs were burning and because the coach was saying we had to come in. No more. That's not that way anymore. But we still have a long way to go. Early in my career, I was executive director of the Coalition for Clean Air, and one of the programs that you see often listed was a product of our efforts. The Carl Moyer program occurred in 1993 while I was executive director, and we had made a decision that we were going to seek legislation to do just this, to create incentives for clean trucks. And that's been a really, I think, very, very effective template for you to use going forward as you take on what is really, I think, an extraordinary opportunity. When I first saw online these documents and the iteration of the potential spending plan, I confess to you I was almost in tears because of the scale of opportunity and the extraordinary potential for success that exists here. I do not think we can get clean air in Southern California really any other way. And I was showing to my son the spending program, and he was looking at the parts of it that said 0 in 2031 for school buses, 0 in other categories for cars and pickups in the same time frame. And he said, "Why 0?" And I said, "Alex, that's because of success. That means that these incentives will no longer be needed. That's how close we are to really making a dramatic difference in our air quality." He said to me as well, "Well, what about greenhouse gases?" And I said, "Alex, reducing air pollution and the strategies to do that are among the most important to do for greenhouse gas reductions." And he said to me, "Dad, I think they should say that." And so I want to encourage you to improve upon this report, not change unless you think air pollution requires a change, but really improve upon it so that folks understand this is not just leadership on clean air that will not only, I think, clean the air here, but will lay the foundations for clean air everywhere. Because as these vehicles become cleaner and more affordable, it's not just here that they're cleaner and more affordable, they become cleaner and more affordable everywhere in the country, perhaps even in the world. This could be the single most important emission reduction strategy adopted by anyone at any time, air pollution and greenhouse gases. So thank you.
Thank you, Denny. Thank you very much. I don't have any more cards, but does anyone else want to make a comment? Seeing none. This is for information only. We are not voting on it, but I think we'll keep our eye on this. And as we even seek co-sponsors on this bill, I think this information is very important. So I urge you to and we know it's going to require more work. You know, this is our first stab at it, and so, but I think it's good because, as Senator Delgado was saying, a lot of people are asking, well, okay, you want this sales tax, but what are you going to spend the money on? And so, you know, we faced that when we went out earlier in the year when we were pushing SB 732. So I think this is a good step.
I forgot to add one really important thing.
Okay, Derek.
This past Tuesday, there was a number of elections in the cities. Specifically, there was six sales tax measures at local cities ballots this past Tuesday. Of the six, 5 of those measures passed. Only one was defeated, but it shows that there is an appetite by the voters for sales tax increases. And, you know, this, you know, is not, it's good to show, and we got a lot of work to do, but, you know, it's helpful for us when we go to Sacramento and say that, you know, this past Tuesday, 5 out of 6 cities passed a sales tax increase. So I forgot to add that earlier.
But in keeping with that, at least one of the cities raised the sales tax to the max so that we could not, they would not be included in our bill.
So actually, Dr. Burke, they were misinformed because our bill exempts our portion from their sales tax cap. So,
but that was their purpose,
right?
Whether they were misinformed or not,
right?
That was their purpose.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a good point to bring up, because that's also a matter of our education of when we do our outreach to the public, just to get the bill passed. I think that's really important, and also then, you know, if you ever go to the ballot on it, very important point. Because we heard that quite a lot, you know, when Derek and I were talking to cities. So we understand that that's a big issue for our cities. Okay, thank you. Is there any other business to come before the committee today? Okay, and is there any public comment on matters that are on the agenda? Not seeing anybody jump up. Okay. So our next meeting is Friday, December 13th. Friday the 13th, wow. Don't put anything important on the agenda. And we'll meet at 9 a.m. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.